Hi, my name is Amy Nurnberger. I'm a research data manager here at Columbia University. I sit within the Center for Digital Research and Scholarship. One of our main projects is the Academic Commons, which is Columbia University's research repository. So we have some experience with working with a variety of documents, document types, data sets, and things like that. So we'll be talking a little bit about that. But I have to be honest, when I first heard about this project, the first thing that popped into my mind is a path, right? What is education but a path from ignorance to knowledge? And what are syllabi except for essentially a map of that path? What are the landmarks that you're going to hit on your way during this course? But as I read more about the Open Syllabus project and looked at their website, what I saw instead is that syllabi are the DNA of the teaching enterprise. And I thought a little about that, and I'm like, really? Is that the metaphor we're going to use for these things? Is it really a good one? And I thought a little bit more about that, and it occurred to me, there was this quote I remember hearing on Nova, because Nova is just a wonderful place to hear things, that DNA is basically a parts list. And if we look at how the Open Syllabus project are presenting these syllabi, not as open full text necessarily, but as metadata drawn from the syllabi, that is, in essence, what we're getting here, is a parts list of what is making up these educational endeavors, right? And so looking at it like this, you don't know how someone travels along that path, but you start getting a sense of what those parts, what are those components that make up these courses, that make up the journey through the education. And this is actually really interesting, because what we can end up doing that is we ingest all these syllabi and they go into this database, and then we're able to structure APIs over this where we can put certain queries to it. And we get answers out about this parts list. And there are some questions that have already been proposed up there, and I think there are others. And the parts list kind of idea is really fascinating, because once you have all of these parts, what's the next really interesting thing is, what are people doing with these parts? It might not be what you ever expected. It might be something brand new. And where you're really starting to build on this and take advantage of this is considering who are the community, who's making up that community that you're presenting these parts to. And I think Joe presented this a little bit, well, at the very beginning when he said, well, who are the audiences that we're dealing with, right? We're dealing with educators, that's some of our audiences, researchers, who I think a great deal of our members are today. Students, I think students are a big part of our audience that we really haven't talked about much today for what this project might mean. And I was thinking about, there's this project called Making It Matter, and they really focus on how can data and linked data be of benefit to third world countries and the education in third world countries, and thinking about that as yet another possible audience for the Open Syllabus project, and how to make these data available to them as another way to use this wonderful corpus that we're putting together here. Now, there are a lot of examples out there in the science world about collections of data and the communities that are built around data, and one of these is the Protein Data Bank, right? And so one of the things they have worked for ages about collecting information about protein and protein structures. And through this project of the Protein Data Bank, they've been able to establish a community that corresponds with each other and sees the value in submitting these data to this general collective area, right? This very focused database for, in this case, protein. There's another one that's great for nanotechnology and nanomaterials that, again, they've looked at ways to talk with their community and to build that community in all of the different ways. And you can see, if you go to that site, if you can see here, all of the different things that they have there. They have lectures that are built around these data. They have tools. They have both their iOS and Android apps out there for exploring all of the information that they've been able to collect here, and really adding value to that type of information as well, which I think is one of the foundations for how do you develop a community. community is not going to build around something that doesn't have any value for anyone. So that's one of the ideas I would encourage everyone here to think about, especially going into the hackathon tomorrow, the non-technical hackathon, about the ideas that you can develop around, so really, who are our audiences and what things might they find useful out of this? And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that, because I think one of the other ways of building community is making sure that not only do people find value in the work that you're doing, but the people who are doing the work are getting credit for the work that they're doing. And I'll talk a little bit about that later on. But one of the first steps to building this community and having all of these data types work together is interoperability, right? The gears have to mesh together. And I think part of this is being worked on through the type of database that's been set up, the NoSQL Mongo database that's being used, and that idea of a flexible schema structure that's being built around that. So we're not locked into one thing, but different parts of information can be pulled out for different queries and different research questions that can be asked. But one of the important parts about this is that to think about and to keep in mind that when you are performing research on these data, that you want to be able to, not just for your own concern, to go back and see what is that question that I asked and what did I ask that question of? And this goes back to the point that Jonah brought up earlier today about, so we have this constantly evolving set of information. How do you identify what that was when you asked your question of it? How can you go back and confirm that you'd get the same question or that your algorithm works in the same way? And so these are some of the issues I encourage you to think about when you think about this corpora as a data set in and of itself, is how do you uniquely identify what you asked the question of? How do you uniquely identify what your question was? Because if, for instance, you're asking a question through a coded query, right? And languages change. So you want to be able to document all of these things and always keep in mind when this is true, that your metadata is a love note to the future. We're not just talking about the metadata associated with that data set, right? We're also talking about how are you describing how you asked your question. What part of that data set did you ask your question of? Was it the whole data set? Was it a specific part of the data set? Was it the data set at a certain date and time? What were the software that were in operation at that point around the data set? And I think Dennis had brought up that they take snapshots of the database, and I don't see Dennis. Oh, there's Dennis. They take snapshots, Dennis, right, of the database weekly or daily or things like that. So one of the things I would encourage you to think about is when you're taking those snapshots, don't just take that snapshot. Give that snapshot an identifier so someone at some point can go back in time and say, I asked the question of this snapshot right here, not this one over here, but this one right here, so that you can not only go back and replicate your answers, but also do really informed comparisons of how was the data set different when you ask that same question of it, and how does it influence how your results are different. So something to think about as we move this project forward. Now, one of the other things that we always, we're dealing with every day as a challenge, no matter what we're doing as academics, is one of attribution, right? One of, how are you getting credit? How is everyone who's contributing to this project getting credit for that? And citation is needed. Citation is needed at every single step of the way. And I think this is really an important thing that can be added into this project so everyone is getting recognized for what they've put into it. Whether it is a professor that has submitted a syllabus, is there a way for them, because they've contributed to this project, that they can then get an identifier out of it so they can get credit to it? And I'm sure you're going to talk more about this later on, aren't you, Caitlin? So I will leave that there for the researchers, but also for everyone who's contributing code and script, for them to get credit for that as well as part of their own research output and their own research endeavors. And I think it's this type of thing that will help the project build a community, become more sustainable, and eventually we hope that move beyond just the sense of building a parts list to really understand more about what the educational endeavor is, to move beyond knowing it takes X, Y, and Z, and understanding why X, Y, and Z can work together to achieve the things that they have achieved in that particular setting. So, going from parts to pathways, and I'm out. Next. Questions? Right on. You're next.
Oh, somebody else.
If I can get the cord to reach. All right. See if this works. All right, so I'll probably have too many slides, but I want to get through in 10 minutes. And the good part is a lot of these topics I think are already covered today. My slides are online on Speaker Deck on the QR code if you want to follow, or RH McDonald on Speaker Deck. A little bit about the HTRC mission. One of my future slides on this really gets you to want to think about that for open syllabuses, identifying that mission up front, so you're not recreating the wheel on something that isn't even part of your mission. And I heard some good things about that today in terms of discovery. It's not part of your mission right now. Great. Find a collaborator to help with that discovery. You're already looking at that with other folks at Penn State. And there's some other great groups to probably talk to about that kind of element. And if you build your infrastructure right, that kind of collaboration can happen all the time. The HTRC is a public research arm of the HathiTrust. We enable terascale text and data mining and analysis of the HathiTrust collection. We develop tools for that purpose. We also work with to develop cyber infrastructure for those tools to run across high-performance computing resources. And we enable community for scholars who are working with our tools and with the infrastructure that we have in place. Key thing to keep in mind for us, we are a research center run by Indiana University and the University of Illinois. We operate under the auspices of the University of Michigan because that's where the legal agreements are all kind of found for the HathiTrust corpus. So we work directly with HathiTrust under University of Michigan for that. And then a lot of the things that we're able to do is because each of our institutions are under an MOU with Google to work with the content that they actually digitize. So if you really looked into the rights and the policies issues of some of the things we're working on, you could spend probably 3 hours on that, so I won't go into it. The challenges, though, that we've had on this, and we go back a long ways with HathiTrust Research Center. We started working on this in 2009, and one of the reasons it took so long, of course, is some of those intellectual property agreements. The other side to this was the Google Books ongoing saga in the court system that kind of slowed some things down and kind of redirected some of our funding into other areas that didn't quite appear for us. But we put together our initial kind of RFP to support the center in 2009, 2010. Then Illinois and Indiana came in to put in a bid on that around 2010 sometime, and then 2011 we moved that forward. But the challenges that you heard some from Miao Chen today with our community components and with our also with some of our technical challenges, but the pieces there around the community, the pieces there around the infrastructure, having a healthy ecosystem that really extends beyond just our institutional-based funding and goes out into areas with partnerships in commercial areas as well as partnerships with other HathiTrust members, other universities. Those are all key things. And then the sustainability piece. I've got a slide on that, but all I'm going to tell you about is to have lots of different revenue streams in terms of that sustainability component, because relying just on a smaller community for base funding will, of course, keep you going for a while you're gearing up R&D tracks for other types of governmental and private funding. But being able to expand that community further and further. The HathiTrust itself has close to 95 members now, and moving forward, we just we're approved funding so that there's actual funding coming from the HathiTrust membership, as well as from Illinois and Indiana, as well as lots of gratis infrastructure coming from both Illinois and Indiana to make what we do possible. The ecosystem there for us: institutional support, commercial support, governmental support, private nonprofit support, and particularly that collaborative support. How are you going to scale? How is that going to drive out to the community you're serving? And of course, all that needs to relate back to your mission. I'm going to put this in, and I'm not going to talk about it much, but I do think it's something to think about anytime you're looking at these communities. Our CIO, Brad Wheeler, developed this chart along with now the university librarian at the University of Michigan, James Hilton. And what he started doing is looking at how things kind of pulled out both from a community source kind of framework within higher ed, from what they call a community source kind of framework within higher ed, typical types of contracts that large institutions enter in for the enterprise and other kinds of support, and then what they call kind of buying clubs, kind of like JSTOR and other things that libraries typically are involved in. And that's one of the other hats I wear during other parts of the day. But with this ecosystem fit, I put, of course, a lot of you will realize these are Drucker's 5 questions about your startup. Because when you look at what you're doing, it's a whole lot like a startup. You just have different types of base funding from your angel investors than you would get if you were out there on your own forming a business. And looking at that mission, who is that customer? What is the customer value? What are the results that you want to see with your product? And what's the plan to get you to those results? Those all help you frame both the fit of the ecosystem as well as the ecosystem that you really need to move forward. The infrastructure piece, I heard great things today, so it sounds like you guys have some wonderful advice coming to you about what you're already setting up and how you're taking it forward. But it's really about the portability of how you set up that infrastructure. And I listed there infrastructure as a service. It's great that you guys are looking at something like Amazon and how you can move your components around in the cloud. But also think about what happens when you scale beyond Amazon, affordability on Amazon, especially for your data, because that's what's going to hang you up. And are you looking at the other open IaaS components you could put in place, like if, say, a large high-performance computing center came in and said, okay, we'll give you data storage space and compute space. How would you move your virtual environments into that environment using something like OpenStack or Eucalyptus? That's kind of the next level question beyond where you are with Amazon. The scalability for that, looking at more of a service-oriented architecture. You're looking at RESTful interfaces. It looks like for your web services. How does that scale longer term? I already heard great stuff about production versus test versus development. I run lots of projects where I'm doing R&D kinds of stuff, and it's all testy and prototypey and so forth. But I run other products that support the entire IU system, and they have to be enterprise. I have a production version, a test version, and a complete development version. And neither the twain shall meet, because my production version has to be up a lot of the time because I have, probably like 500 to 600 staff that rely on the systems to do their business every day of the week. The development of the community infrastructure is a big piece, and these kind of meetings help drive that because people get to meet each other and see the projects they're working on. But how do you take that over into the long-term, year-to-year online environment for support? And driving, the next grand challenges that you have. One of the things we've done with HathiTrust is get funding from the Mellon Foundation to drive mini challenge grants to get people to look at work set creation and extraction from our larger set. And over time, that's going to, give us a corpus of research to show what we can do, especially when we start mining the full collection. We've been mining the kind of in public collection right now to test out our prototype. We'll be moving to the full collection in the next few months, and that really took a lot of security auditing around what we're doing so we could prove to the University of Michigan that we were matching the kind of elements they were offering to secure the content. And that's the kind of thing that you can't do if you don't have a production environment where it's production, test, development. If you don't have that, then you can't always answer those kinds of questions when you look at that realm. Now, of course, what you guys are talking about doesn't have kind of the constrictions that we're under with HathiTrust. The other big piece is, as you scale, how do you connect to the in-kind or the most available high-performance computing or cluster resources that could be available to you just from the community that you're in because you're attached to a major university and you're attached to groups that are attached to places like NSF. How can you utilize those and get your costs down over the long term versus just paying strictly to Amazon or somebody for that? It depends on what you're doing with the resources, of course. The community, I already mentioned, the functional, the technical, and I listed 2 user groups here, both your physical one when you have events like this or a user group meeting, but the virtual one that's online, that's how you're supporting people longer term to use your collection, and having a good outreach component where you're having both the WebEx online types of meetings and discussions with your community as well as the in-person one. That's going to be key for driving people to develop for your platform, to develop using services for your content and doing mix and remix of your content over time. Sustainability, really I just wanted to have this in there, thinking about the multiple income streams, thinking about where your umbrella support is. I work with a lot of projects on the sustainability issue, groups like the Vivo project, groups like quality open library environment. We've taken different paths than, say, HathiTrust has. HathiTrust is still under an umbrella of the University of Michigan. I think that's a real viable path for a lot of things, and I think that's one that everyone should consider. Other places for a while were trying to build their own 501c3 around everything. I really think that's a bad idea if you can find one that could support you with the right umbrella, both for what you need internally to do your work, whether it's your setups for your repositories and your communications and your Confluence kind of stuff for your developers, and then whether they have ongoing user group meetings that you can piggyback onto so you can get the cost down, to get to have longer term user group meetings. Those are all key things. And so my big lessons out of all of this is think before you build, which you guys have obviously done. Build for a production service model, even if you're not doing it right away. Think, have that in mind and plan for it. Enable a diverse ecosystem for support, and that really means figuring out who in the commercial community might be part of that ecosystem, because out of all these groups that I've worked with over time, the ones that seem to have the longest life in them really have found the right kind of niches to support services from a commercial element that are around them. And they still remain open, they still remain community source or open source, whatever they're doing with their software, but they're finding the right kind of service providers. And sometimes, that it's not always the first people that talk to you, it's the third or fourth or fifth that become that ecosystem, and then the diversity of funding streams. So that was really quick, but it also kind of highlighted a lot of great things that were going on here today that I heard, from all these great talks that we've seen so far. So we can have questions, or we can move on to the next speaker, possibly.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Where does your data come from? The raw data?
The raw data. So the raw data all came in aggregate from Google scans, from basically the project that they set up originally for Google Books. And the idea was to scan the University of Michigan library in full. Now, the interesting part about that, anytime you want to do that to a library, there's always going to be something that was missing. It wasn't collected at the right period of time. It got lost along the way. So then when they started having their other partner members, like the libraries of the Big Ten CIC group, they started doing collection analysis on it, saying, okay, we have all of this, but we're missing these. So they started looking at the other libraries that had them. IU, for instance, for 2 years, we had a couple of truckloads a month that went to the scanning facility. And most of that was just to fill in the gaps of what was either not on the shelf or missing long-term in Michigan's library, that kind of thing. And then there are also copies of books that were done by individual libraries that were collected by HathiTrust. And that was one of the incentives for membership was not only did you get the aggregate access long-term and storage for preservation for the Google Books collection, but you could add to that for volumes that weren't already there that you might have already scanned from work you had done previously for digital libraries. So that's really where all the raw data is coming from there.
And how to incrementally add more data?
So right now, the stuff with Google is trickling down, but we're using the same interface that they developed, which is called GRIN, and that's how the libraries continue to contribute volumes that they're scanning moving forward.
So you don't have your own quality? You don't have quality?
No. This all came from basically a scanning process similar to what Internet Archive does with their book scanning, but Google had some twists and turns on that made it more efficient. It's of course Google property. So, but it's an interesting process, yeah. All right. And we've got the same. We got a slide deck on this one, so we could just slide over if that's okay. Is that gonna work?
Should be fine.
You can swap if you want.
Should be fine.
Okay.
Yeah. I had trouble kind of putting the slides up, so I'm just following this.
All right. Should be down there.
Yeah. I think I got that.
Right.
Yeah, Open Learning Analytics is one of the initiatives that we are associated with. It's kind of a combined effort between two groups. It just started out recently. Apereo Foundation is one of the groups, and I'm wearing Apereo hat as well today. And Solar is another research community which kind of has been doing considerable amount of work in the field of learning analytics. They host regular conferences. If you're familiar with Learning Analytics and Knowledge Conference, it kind of attracts like international audience, a group of researchers, actually a broad spectrum of people in terms of their expertise coming from a variety of fields, trying to tackle the common problem of how do we track how learners are learning in the particular environment, and how do we enrich the experience kind of thing. Okay, my name is Sandeep Jayaprakash, and I'm a learning analytics specialist at Marist College, and I also work closely with the open source community, the Apereo Foundation. A little bit of context about both of the groups out here, if people are not familiar with either of these. In this particular initiative, what we try to do is try to define and create like what goes into creating the learning analytics software, which is completely open source and available for wide scale adoption. We also define standards around various use cases in terms of developing targeted learning analytics softwares. And we also deal with open models, like how do we share the insights and models and algorithms that we have created. How do we make that portable? How can we make that deploy in a wide range of settings, and provide integrations with a wide range of platforms out there in terms of LMSs or any other applications. And we also have like a series of journals and avenues where we regularly make publication efforts so that we disseminate knowledge across the community, so everyone is aware of what's going on, and we move forward without a lot of duplication of effort, and we keep each other in touch about like various projects that are going on, and provide more opportunities for collaboration. And it is definitely not anti-commercial, and that is one of the important aspects. The commercial ecosystems help in sustainability of the open source communities as well. So it's completely open source initiative. Everyone is free to come and associate with us, or if there are like mutual areas of collaboration, we would love to talk more regarding that. Okay, much of the work that has been done in terms of analytics is kind of more focused towards a specific goal, and it has not been like widely adopted or widely available for all of the folks out there to kind of dig into it or test it out in their environments and see how it works, right? So that's why we made an effort to collaborate more towards this particular approach, and see like how we can create more openness in terms of sharing all of these ideas and resources and best practices, and what kind of issues we can mitigate together, or are we covering enough use cases. All those problems are something which we try to tackle in this particular initiative. And some of the goals were more towards like documenting what are the domains that we should be looking at in terms of creating more openness in the field itself, in the data mining field, educational data mining and content analysis field itself. Identify the current landscape and how we can engage with each other with minimal duplication, and create more reference implementations and evidence hubs where people can come forward and try each other innovations and test it out in their environments. And also networking and collaboration is one of the major goals. I'll skim through a couple of slides and just give a brief background about. I think we missed. Okay. SOLAR, the acronym is Society for Learning Analytics and Research. Their main interest, it's a combined interest, is to create more like a common framework, an Apache Commons model, where we have best practices available and standards available. Everyone is working together in terms of trying to identify what tools work best in what scenarios. How do we provide the success rate for each of the frameworks that is available out there? That kind of an approach where we don't necessarily say that follow one particular architecture or something like that, but we provide more details as to what kind of architecture works best, what kind of frameworks work best in your particular setting or something. And basically we are looking into creation of a commons model for analytics, which is for most part platform neutral. So each of the components can be plugins which are interacting with each other, as long as we are sharing data in common formats like JSON or XML, which can be ingested by majority of the tools or softwares that are available out there. Apereo, it was a merger between two open source communities out there. Sakai, which is one of the learning management system, a completely open source platform, which has a global presence in terms of large scale deployment in terms of higher education. And JZEG is another platform which develops tools within higher education. And both of these recently, like last year, collaborated, combined their efforts together to form Apereo. Basically, they merged together to form Apereo. That's a little bit of background of some of the projects that are available within the Apereo Foundation. Sakai, that is the LMS platform. There are a lot of portlet projects and authentication frameworks. Student Success Plan is more towards intervention, and OAE is more towards academic collaboration, bringing research communities together, providing out of classroom experience for all the users, students, faculties, researchers to collaborate better in a more socially interactive setting. And like I said, it has a global presence out there, with majority of focus in North America and Australia and Africa. 80% of French universities are kind of currently running on Sakai, so there is a lot of data that is being generated that there are opportunities for us to analyze. So we recently kickstarted the Learning Analytics Initiative. Our major goal was to have the research meet a sustainable model fairly quickly, operationalize some of the softwares and APIs and standards that are being developed as a part of the Open Learning Analytics Summit itself. So these were some of the institutions that actually participated, that actually kickstarted this particular initiative. The University of Amsterdam, they've been working more towards data collection and storage, basically streaming data from a wide range of sources in terms of SIS, LMS, social settings like Twitter feeds and Facebook. What they are into is bringing all of this data together into one common repository called Learning Record Store, which provides an opportunity for analysts and researchers like me to go there and build applications, which is kind of analogous to the model Dennis was explaining, where once all the data is collected and we have performed all the how to ingest this particular data, we can write data adapters where we are sending out targeted data to each of the applications, which can be an app store model of a variety of analytical solutions, like it can be your retention solutions, trying to predict like who are the students who are at risk, or it can be more towards content analysis, what is the quality of submissions, or just like social network analysis of what kind of learning patterns are emerging within the social network, how people are interacting with each other. So a wide range of solutions are available within the App Store model. And the next Learning Analytics conference is going to be held at Marist College, which is an hour and a half from here, upstate New York. And we have a beautiful campus, and we expect all of you to come and participate in this particular summit. We'll also have the Open Learning Analytics Summit and a hackathon, which is going to be pre-conference or post-conference. We are still working on the details on that, but that would be another avenue where people who have similar interests, like the OSD project out here, where tomorrow in the hackathon you are trying to define the open models, what goes into creating open data sets, how do we share the data and everything. It is going to be pretty much the same thing we had the last summit in Indianapolis, right after the LAC 14 conference, and that's where we defined the various domains, like the 5 domains in terms of open models and open source software, what goes into creating a plugin model, creating more architectures and frameworks, defining ethics and privacy and the policies related to that. So it's pretty much the same setting, the core concept. So it would be great to have like more participation in who have like similar interests and similar approaches, and getting a wide range of inputs in order to take it forward as a community itself. Any questions, comments?
Question?
Yeah.
What kinds of data are you playing with and handle? And are the analytics motivated by like pedagogical evaluations, or is it more like statistics, descriptive?
Well, actually both. Both of the components are involved at this point. We are analyzing data, like I said, from the student information systems, which is mostly demographics and static data, which doesn't change over a semester, and learning management system data, which is your event logs, any kind of submissions or assignments, tests and quizzes, forums. So that generates a lot of content as well, which we can dig into in terms of more into text mining and NLP, where we are trying to assess the quality of the submissions of the students. That is another dimension. There is also interest within the community to look more into the MOOC data. That is also NoSQL kind of data. So that is another dimension where we are trying to create more reference implementations and targeted applications to it. So, yeah. Any other questions? Okay. After the next speaker.
Okay. Oh, I think he's next. Are you there?
I think so, but I think it was off the screen from before. Oh, you know what?
Yeah.
All right. That ought to do it.
Okie dokie. So my name is Judd Ratner, and I'm the founder of a company that's basically specialized in syllabi for about the last 6-7 years. So a lot of the conversation that I've heard today are definitely things that we have heard before. Of course, our interests have maybe been a little bit different because of the fact that we are a for-profit. But when it comes to intellectual property, when it comes to adoption, integration, all of these types of things are frankly things that we've encountered before. So what I want to do today is spend a few minutes describing those. In fact, we've actually touched upon so many of them, I'll probably go through the slides quickly, but then showcase our tool also, because since the discussion came up before about should the data be more structured, what kinds of schema might you approach with it, this will probably demonstrate what is the ultimate in terms of a framework for a syllabus schema. Again, I wouldn't necessarily recommend that this particular project actually go that far, but when you see it, you'll see why. So a little bit about us, though. Intellidemia is kind of a hard name to say, so we have become affectionately the Syllabus Geeks. So we've been doing this for quite some time. We now have clients across the United States and abroad. I happen to be here in New York. The other office is in California, and we really have, I believe, become thought leaders in this particular space. And what we had recognized very early on in terms of trends is that there are many more applications for syllabi these days. Certainly one in terms of the syllabus as a contract, and that's kind of what it has traditionally been described as. But then we were seeing that it was being utilized in a much more assessment-oriented way, specifically accreditation, or often accreditation. And then when we talk about marketing, we're really talking about the marketing of the actual classes, and whether that be among your current community of students, to prospective students, to other faculty members. So the drivers for that we found were A, a focus on outcomes, B, legislation, and here we are primarily talking about House Bill 2504, which has come up a number of times today in Texas, and then at this point just ubiquitous access. So even the idea of getting your syllabus on your mobile device is something that is expected of today's students, but certainly not supported by most of the current forms. So what institutions have been doing is they have taken a more institutional approach to managing syllabi. This is more like having master templates, which maybe define a course description, or the course description comes from the course catalog, or outcomes are predefined in such a way that the instructors are starting off with some boilerplate language. In fact, the range that we find, our tool is designed to be flexible in this respect, but we will find clients, largely the for-profits and the community colleges, which is our bread and butter, whereby with large percentages of adjunct faculty members and a teaching focus, they are absolutely going after this sort of master template approach. I think many of you in the room are probably thinking much more on the other side, or come from environments that are on the other side where faculty freedom is really the area that is of more concern, or the ability for an instructor to actually design their syllabus however they may be. But in a lot of our cases, it's very much a sort of structured approach. And schools are introducing technological solutions, whether they build it in-house, whether they adopt something like Concourse, or the types of tools that you guys are also working on. I want to make that a little bit more salient by providing, this is what Shepherd University puts out. And what they basically have here in the 4 different colors are some of the things that are considered federally mandated, some that are West Virginia mandated, some that are mandated by Shepherd, and then things that are open for instructors. And as you can tell, this is not necessarily a very technological solution, and of course instructors can go in there and can manipulate certain policies like ADA. They don't necessarily have to follow only the black or whatnot, and our tool comes to help in this respect. So what has sort of happened is that there's this all hands on syllabus, on syllabi, and the reason that we talk about the fact that this is the life cycle of a syllabus is that if you think about the document from end to end, it goes through some kind of development and approval. It may have a template form. It might get audited. Again, that's, I know, a somewhat scary word to maybe some of the institutions that are represented here, but I can promise in many of our client situations, they are looking precisely at every single instructor's syllabus to check it off before it even goes public. Then it comes into its instructional mode, and then there's some degree of analysis. The reason I put this number down here too is that for many institutions, because of how spread out these things can be and the different people that are involved, our research has told us that around $250,000 a year is invested in the management of actual syllabi.
How did you get that?
It's probably not as researched as maybe some of the folks in this room might do, but it comes from a combination of surveying of deep surveying in a number of different institutions that we looked at their infrastructural costs. We looked at the amount of time that deans spent on syllabi, whether it be via reviewing them. We looked at the curriculum development process. We looked at the amount of instructors' time to develop a new syllabus, to maintain a syllabus throughout a semester. And that was the number that we arrived at. So that would largely be for a school of around 4,000 students is how that got scaled.
And anecdotally, there was a university in Texas that put that same figure, $250,000.
Right, that was actually after ours, but yes, they had noted that too.
The CV and the syllabi for one institution. So, I think that's an accurate figure.
Yeah, sometimes it's hard. I mean, we've done this primarily motivated from a sales approach because we need to demonstrate to the school that they're wasting money in some kind of way. But of course, in many university settings, like professor time is just regarded as free. And so that can become hard. So the organizations that are most interested have these types of characteristics for a more structured approach to syllabi, and that they may have multiple campuses, or a high percentage of adjunct faculty members. They're much more teaching focused, standardized curricula, rapid growth. Maybe they have a lot of online programs. So most of our clients sort of look like this. I do want to spend a few minutes actually showcasing the tool. So to succinctly describe it, though, it's an online syllabus solution to organize, share, and analyze the life of syllabi. So if I jump out of this and I head over to the actual system for a moment here, we can see that. I'm only going to point out a couple of features today. This demo is available. If you want to go to syllabusgeeks.com and actually play around with it a little bit, you can do that as well. But this is our syllabus solution. So after logging in, I'm going to just go through two different examples here. We have two essentially editions of the product. One which is designed to consume PDFs and Word documents. It scrapes the text. It makes them searchable. And that's actually may even be an interesting play with respect to this given group because this is what we do. It may not be as fully functional in terms of things like an API because that's a decision that we made given the proprietary nature of our business, but I at least want to showcase what we can do. So if I pick on art history here, this is just going to load essentially a syllabus. This is not terribly fancy, but what's interesting about this is given our other features of auditing and search and being able to embed it with a learning management system, we can really drive adoption rates once there's a button inside the LMS that says syllabus and they're putting it right into the central system. What everyone will probably find far more interesting here is that this is our interpretation after half a decade of work of essentially what the structure of a syllabus should look like. So after looking at thousands of these, they all generally have an area that's called meeting times, one that's called contact information. We have a degree of nesting of the data in terms of the presentation, but this is a database-driven solution. So behind the scenes, there's actually a table that represents each of these different elements. So again, for what you're doing in terms of the research world and how you're developing these schemas, this could very well be like the holy grail of all of the data that you want to get out. I'm going to showcase after this how you can run a report that will specifically pull out the outcomes part of every single syllabus. No question about whether or not it's outcomes or not, or so forth.
Clarification: you're not ingesting documents and producing that, right?
That's true.
These in the database, and then you are dynamically generating the document based on what's in the
right. So this is an authoring tool. The next thing I'll show is that. The reason it's maybe a little bit different than just a straight, it's not a word experience. I'll show what it is in a second. But the reason is that the development of syllabi in our tool are largely based on a template structure. So a provost will fill out a piece of the syllabus, and then deans can fill out more pieces of the syllabus, and then a curricular person fills out more pieces. So what the instructor normally inherits is not something they have to start from end to end. It will have a lot of information on it already. So. But anyway, in terms of the different components, or we call them items, you've got description materials, and so we have a structure that we can discuss maybe tomorrow and how well this fits. But I do want to show editing and I do want to show reporting before finishing up. So when I go to edit a given syllabus, we have this side-by-side experience, and it is form-driven. So if I wanted to come in here and I wanted to update, say, my lecture time, I click this yellow edit button and I'm presented with a form. So you can imagine that every one of these forms is essentially matched to a database table. So later on, if you want to see specifically how many people offer office hours between the hours of 2 and 3 o'clock, we can even do that with our data set. So you can come here, you can update it. Another question about the sort of dynamic nature of syllabi, we inherently support that. We think that the right approach is to have syllabi evolve over their semester so at the end of the given semester, it's a accurate representation of what was happening in the given classroom. Just to scroll down here before I get to reporting and search, you'll notice that there are tools are absent to the left side of the course description. That is the enforcement of our permissions. So you can essentially have parts of the syllabus that, at least now that I'm in the shoes of an instructor, are not necessarily editable. And the same would be true all the way down in the bottom for institutional policy. So for each of these given items, you can determine, should an instructor be able to come in here, edit that piece, not that piece? Should they get a default for it and then be able to embellish it? Those sorts of things. Okay, so I'm getting close to wrapping up here. I know I talked about templates briefly, and I won't go more into that at this point, but again, it's this type of structure where you can build this tree, if you will, of syllabus documents, and that's how why most institutions are interested. But I'm going to finish up here by showcasing our reporting tool. So when I pick an item report, this is going to demonstrate essentially what the full tree looks like for this particular instance. And at this point, if I wanted to get outcomes, I would click on outcomes, I click next, I'm then presented with our search tool. You can do full text search from in here, or if you want to, you can drop down this advanced menu and you get to some of the more typical parameters like what semester it was offered, what instructor. In this case, I'm just going to search for everything. And I'm going to, against all these results, I'm going to say I want just the outcomes. And here it presents a table of just the outcomes that are represented on that given syllabus. And if you want more information, and there are many more columns to this, you can download it as a CSV for additional detail. So that's the end of the formal demo, I guess. I think I may have wrong direction. So I want to talk just these 3 points about what we've learned and then wrap up. So 1, we're a business, that's true, but we absolutely underestimated how difficult it is to sell to not only institutions, we were going first after instructors, but institutions as a whole, very, very, very challenging. Syllabi come in all shapes and sizes. We've talked about that today. I do sincerely believe that standardization has its value, but it certainly does not come easily or naturally. It's where we spend most of our implementation energy, because you have to imagine a provost has to be willing to say, it's going to be called outcomes. It's not going to be called learning outcomes. It's not going to be called objectives. And that is a discussion in and of 5 meetings of a faculty committee just to come up with, if it's outcomes, learning outcomes, whatever. So I think that it is absolutely important to utilize a common taxonomy, because I really think this could be hugely beneficial. How easy it is to actually develop that type of taxonomy is a different question. But that's certainly one of the things that we've learned. So to wrap up, we remain available to help. Largely, of course, interested in the technology elements, even though we can speak to many of these different topics. Access to our concourse platform is on the table, and I think that maybe the most interesting thing would be to develop an actual standard for the interchange of structured syllabus data. So, any questions for me?
You may have said this, and I missed it. Approximately how many syllabi, or order of magnitude-wise, how many syllabi do you have this?
It's somewhere in the order of 200,000 to 300,000. And again, these are all structured documents, so the level of detail is quite deep. And we also know that there is far less duplication than there might be in these other efforts.
Why setting to educational is hard?
Why is selling to education hard? Well, you need a lot of consensus, a lot of buy-in. If you think of it purely in the business sense, you would think that they have a lot of money, but oftentimes they say they don't. They're expecting a level of performance that maybe an Oracle or a Cisco would provide, but they want the education price. We only sell to education, so we can't, like Dell, just come in and offer those same types of prices. So from a business standpoint, that can sometimes be hard. We have challenges with getting to the right decision maker, because the decision maker is actually hundreds of decision makers. So for somebody who's going to say, I'm going to put a system in, you could just picture this in the Columbia sense. How much inertia or energy would actually take for the entire organization to say, I'm going to adopt this standard structure for syllabi, and everybody is going to use it. I'm going to integrate it with your LMS here. It's just an arduous task. And I think also maybe we were a little bit early when we started out on this path. I think many of these other surrounding initiatives have made it a much more attractive proposition for a school to move this direction at this point.
And one last question. Do you do version control?
So we do and we don't. Largely our version control comes from the fact that schools have the ability to make copies when they so choose. So an example of that is if, actually maybe if I back up here, this will help me explain this. It's going way too fast. Okay, this is an example of our template structure. And you can see that you have institution to college courses, you could like build out these. But the point at which we actually do cloning, that's essentially taking a snapshot of the syllabus. And from that point on, the purple is effectively what the instructor would be using. So the reason that we do things this way is to make sure that future syllabus policies, I'll use a very trite example. Let's just assume Columbia decided that cheating is going to be allowed next semester. You wouldn't necessarily want that policy to show up on previous syllabi, especially from the contractual element. So the kind of versioning that we have going on here is that we're essentially taking snapshots of master templates for every given term, and then we walk through the versions of syllabi, but contained, if you will, within that given course. Okay, I think you had your hand. Okay.
I was just wondering, is there any way, it seems unlikely, but there's no way to expose these syllabi in any way, or search on them, or aggregate data across, because each one of these institutions are running a concourse.
Right. So each, you're right. I mean, we are a SaaS tool, so actually it's not as segmented as the schools may believe that we are, but because they all run a common code base. But yes, they do have actual separate databases. Now, the other question about exposure maybe also has to do with whether the publicity of it. So a number of the schools that we have, like Alamo and Blinn, are examples of institutions whereby they have to make everything public because of this legislation in the first place. So if you went into our tool, you could find all of those, instantaneously. But some other schools are much more tight, lipped about their syllabi.
So do you sell to Alamo and Blinn? Mm-hmm. So that means that since I captured those, they should all have the same structure?
It depends on what you captured. I mean, we've been supporting them for years at this point, so I have to imagine that might have come out that way.
What standards have you already considered integrating with? And those of you who follow Twitter, I found Post-Secondary Educational Standards Council has a relevant standard that doesn't go into internals of the syllabus. It talks about courses and prerequisites and so forth.
So yeah, there's essentially a pretty big separation between what we call a course and what we call a syllabus. The syllabus to us is the content that incorporates the description, the outcomes, the schedule, effectively the administrative structure of the course. We've heard it called paths before. I mean, there's a number of different terms. To us, course level data is going to include when it's offered, what its title is, and whatnot. And so those are the kinds of things where at least a number of standards per se exist already. To my knowledge, there is not any kind of syllabus standard. When I also think about standards, I also think about the integration points that we have. And largely in order to work with the learning management system, it's things like Learning Tools Interoperability, or LTI, which we are absolutely compliant with. In fact, we actually started a second business that specializes purely on third-party integration with learning management systems because of how challenging they call it a standard, but I promise you the way it's implemented is nothing close to it. So more on our integration if you want, but as far as a syllabus standard, I don't believe one exists. I thought I saw a hand. Okay, in the back.
Yeah. So it sounds like this is principally a workflow tool for the design of new syllabi or construction of new syllabi. Have any of your clients asked you to deal with the historical syllabi that they have in their databases? Essentially, I'm trying to get at whether or not you've dealt with any of the ingestion problems yourself.
Ingestion in the way that it's been described here, not so much. But for example, when these colleges come to us, we sometimes have gone through migrations. So we will take like CurricuNet data and find a way to map CurricuNet's structure to what we already have. And it works most of the time, but it's not perfect. But we don't necessarily have any kind of like intelligent syllabus analyzer that was able to like just consume a syllabus and then produce it in its structured form. I think if that existed, it would be hugely beneficial to us. But no. So the historical approach that we take is like the PDF I showed in the beginning, which is still very valuable. again, I think as a business we went too far in the beginning, because if you say to us, like, it's a huge leap even for a school to have a central syllabus database of PDFs. And we want to do outcome linking, and we automatically notify students when a syllabus is updated, and we have calendar integration, so you can bring your syllabus and you can actually sync it with Google Calendar. For most schools, I want to just get a repository together, and that's like step one. Sure.
So in terms of the encoding on the back end of the syllabi in your possession, is it XML? Is there an open standard for this? I noticed, I poked around a little bit, there's a discussion on the TEI listservs about implementing something like this from about 15 years ago, but I can't find that anyone has actually...
I admit I actually was not even aware of that effort even until earlier today. You know, it's a database driven, it's a Postgres solution, so it's you can't necessarily like export an XML version or a JSON version, but that's exactly what I'm talking about when I think about the development. We've actually experimented somewhat with that, but at the end of the day, even if we allowed syllabi to come in as JSON, we didn't know of any other solutions that would consume it, and from a business perspective, of course, that also can be anti to what we were doing. So at this point, I'd like to do that kind of development, but it hasn't materialized yet.
Not just a question for Jed. I guess we talked you know, a lot today about what makes syllabi complicated, and not to make them too much more complicated, but as far as like where syllabi are going, there's been some hints today about how they're increasingly contractual and administrators are adding to them. But you know, we look today at this historical, you know, the beautiful graphic novel one, and you know, a couple things that are coming to my mind in terms of where things are going are things like video. You know, in a lot of MOOCs, the description of the course is now offered in video, and I think at Duke, the students on campus are demanding that kind of explanation or description for their courses on campus too. I can imagine I've been in courses where the students themselves in the course of the semester dynamically help create what they're going to study, say in the second half of the semester, and you know, you incorporate some elements of, you know, change over time, but you know, so I'm wondering, like, is it premature? Like, what do we preclude when we introduce standards at this point, for example, and where do we think this is going? And I think the presumption of a text-based static syllabus is might be a big problem.
So, a few things. We do find people who do interesting things with our tool. I'll say that in quotes. But you know, some of them they embed images, they embed videos and whatnot, and our tool supports that kind of thing. I think maybe the bigger question is essentially what is the end of the syllabus to the beginning of the learning environment. And granted, the syllabus is oftentimes embedded as a part of the learning environment, but if you're having some kind of video discussion, I mean, does that actually make sense to have somehow related to the syllabus, or should the syllabus just say, on this given day, we're going to be doing video discussions, here's the link to go to this other place in the LMS where that is actually captured. So again, the end of the syllabus to the beginning of the course, maybe that's even a blurry line, but I think that you're still going to find, I would believe it's still going to find that there is a document that codifies the implementation of the course.
But what about when that document changes over the course of the semester? Because the students and the faculty are collectively, as we see increasingly.
Right. So we are actually very strong, and we take a position that that's what's going to happen. Because often what we would find is that if schools lock down our syllabi entirely, then instructors would essentially go around the system, and they would start emailing. They'd say, "Hey, this test is going to be on Friday instead of Tuesday," or whatever it is. So we try to make it as easy as possible for instructors to actually visit the platform and edit the elements of the syllabus that the school has determined are actually appropriate for manipulation. Manipulating things like a grading scheme is a very you don't really want to do that kind of thing. And I know we've heard about legal earlier today, but like when you say that a test used to be worth 30% and now it's worth 10, it's going to hurt someone. So we make it easy for them to update throughout the semester. We think we provide the most accurate reflection of what a course is at the end. And then in some cases, it probably isn't an appropriate thing to edit in the first place.
There's one more speaker, right? Yep. So yeah, let's move on to the next speaker. We're a little bit behind. We can catch up with more questions during the drinks time.
I don't remember what.
It's okay. Don't worry. I'll clean it up later.
Popped off.
Oh, thank you.
Let's try that again.
Okay. I wanted to start with a personal anecdote that I thought would be appropriate for this group. My brother's a physics professor at Westchester University, just outside of Philadelphia, and he had a problem. And his problem was that he felt that the enrollment of his Physics 101 course was a little anemic, that he could do a better job attracting more students into taking that Physics 101 course. And so he tinkered, and he changed things around in the syllabus to see if he could attract more non-physics students into his Physics 101 course. And then he got tenure, and then he went on sabbatical, as many people do after they get tenure. And he decided while on sabbatical to completely rebuild Physics 101 from the ground up, thinking not about the material, but about the student and why they weren't coming to Physics 101, why they weren't enrolling in that class, and what can lower that barrier of entry. And this is what he came up with. There he is in the chef's hat. And it blew the barn doors off the problem. Food, fire, and physics, the science of cooking. With live demonstrations and a connection between the recipes and the physics, and then a convivial eating and sharing and discussing, and that blending itself into a study, spontaneous Q&A period, etc. So I just wanted to share that with you because I thought I wanted to underscore the importance, from my perspective, of what you're doing in helping discover examples like this in this treasure trove of data that is that you're helping to mine and to uncover these kinds of gems. It's also a great setup for digital science. Digital science is an incubator. We fund companies. And the companies we fund are founded by academics, ex-academics, who decided rather than to write a grant to see if they could create some to implement a project that they became interested in or to solve a problem that they encountered. They decided that they wanted to start a company because they didn't want to live grant to grant, and they wanted to create something that was more sustainable, and they wanted to pay their developers and send them to conferences and do other sorts of things like that. And our space is all of academia, so not just in the laboratory, not just behind the lectern, but also in the provost's office as well. You may already be aware of some of the companies that we fund. Figshare, for example, which is a open data repository service that is, I think, it's probably the company that has the most love among academics. That was founded by a stem cell researcher who was frustrated that a tiny, tiny fraction of his research was going to end up in the literature, in a published paper, and that negative data had no home. And yet that's exactly the kinds of data that you want to put out there so people won't repeat the same experiment that you've already done well and documented. And or they may find a positive in your negative data and then take that into a different direction. And another example is altmetric. We've talked about at various points today impact and identifying what types of scholarship are being incorporated into syllabi. And I'll talk a little bit more about how altmetric is an out-of-the-box solution for that problem. But one of the main, if you just remember one thing from the next 4 or 5 slides I'll share with you. It's this, that if you have an open project that you want to sustain, it's okay to, in fact, it's, I would argue, to your advantage to find paying customers, I know that's a scary thing to hear in academia, who have problems that are willing to spend money to solve, and connecting that to your project. And it's okay that a small, think of it as a Venn diagram, that among all of your users, a small circle of those users might be paying users. But those paying users enable the users that use your product for free to continue to use your product, and it enables you to finance expanding your product, upgrading it, and again, paying your developers, going to conferences, etc. So that's the one thing I would love for you to take away from this, and I'll show examples, two case studies in which there are products that are open and free for researchers to use, that the founders have identified paying customers that help finance that project and enable it to be a self-sustaining company. Digital Science is, as I mentioned, we're an incubator. We were spun out of Nature Publishing Group in about 2010. We are part of a large organization, Macmillan, which itself is part of Holtzbrinck. So we have many, many, many companies. And we leverage the fact that we have friends in different parts of the organization. For example, this is a publication that I collaborated with. My team built a data set and some visualizations that were published in Scientific American that we mutually benefited from each other's strengths. So our innovation and our expertise with data visualization, data mining, and their built-in audience. We do have a grants program called the Catalyst Grant. It's very small, but it's one model in which people who don't have a initially commercial application of their idea can have a play. But again, the main theme that I wanted to share with you is how to take that project that's a great idea and that you want to keep open, you want to keep free for researchers to use, but you also want to have it sustained and be part and have a revenue stream that's independent of a grant, because of course those are not guaranteed year on year. And what is the key to that? The key is really simple. Find a problem that people are willing to spend money to solve. And so really what you're doing is you're looking for pain. Not nice to have, not that's cool, but pain. Because that's what people are going to pull out their credit cards and buy if you've got a solution for them. 2 case studies. Figshare, as I mentioned, I'm sure some of you have heard of Figshare, is free for researchers to use. If you have done beautiful experiments and you have completely negative data and you're not going to use that data, Figshare is a wonderful home for that data. Your data will get a DOI. It's citable. The platform allows you to share it with other researchers, and it's completely free. They have privacy options. You can make it private or public. It's in the cloud. And how is it possible that this wonderful service is available for you to use for free? Because in that Venn diagram, there's a small set of users that have a problem that Figshare solves better than any other solution on the marketplace. So for example, many publishers have supplementary data associated with articles. And that supplementary data is often just a mishmash of PDFs or a giant Word document with figures in it. It's usually very lightly edited, but often for aficionados in the field, it's very critical to be able to access that supplementary data. And so Figshare offers a wonderful solution to being able to store all that stuff in the cloud, associate it with the article, but allow the publisher to concentrate on what they do best, which is the article itself and the editing and the publication and dissemination of that article. Figshare also is launching a product to solve the problem that many academics have, academic institutes have, in which they would like an institutional repository for data. Many, as has been mentioned earlier, many government agencies are now mandating that universities that receive federal funding provide access to the data associated with the papers, with the research that's generated from that federal funding. And so Figshare is providing a plug-and-play solution for academic institutes. Some academic institutes want to build their own repository. That's great. Other academic institutes do not want to get into the business of being hosting data. And so Figshare is a great solution for that. And again, these paying customers help make Figshare free for individual users. The second case example is Altmetric. So Altmetric is a tool that crawls the web. It crawls blogs, Twitter, Facebook, mainstream media outlets, and looks for mentions of papers. Usually links to the paper itself, and it uses the DOI to uniquely identify the paper and then map on the mentions it picks up onto that paper, and it creates a score. That little, called the donut, the Altmetric donut with the number in the middle, represents the different kinds of media attention associated with that paper. And so publishers want to provide this as a service to their authors. It enables them to stay competitive with other publishers. Authors are very interested to know who's blogging about their paper, who's tweeting about their paper, what newspapers have picked up the story and are writing about it. And it also enables publishers to have a dashboard of all of the papers they publish for their journal and which articles are receiving what kind of media attention. And Altmetric is free to use for an individual researcher. So you can upload a bookmarklet, and then if you're looking at a PDF, you can get an Altmetric score for any document that has a PDF. So specifically to the Open Syllabus project, we already have an out-of-the-box solution. Therefore, for the problem of I'd like to search syllabi for mentions of research articles and try to understand and discover what research articles are being cited by syllabi. So we have that. Altmetric would be an out-of-the-box solution for that problem. And as I mentioned before, it could potentially enable researchers to discover who is using their material in their courses. Researchers otherwise would have no idea that somebody halfway across the country is using their Nature Reviews paper as a introduction to what a canonical HeLa cell, cell biology is like, right? So Altmetric would enable that. And I've spoken with Ewan, and he's keen on the sandboxing and playing with data sets. And I hope I can introduce him to some of you who might be interested in playing around with this idea. Closing thoughts, as I mentioned, I think many ideas are wonderful, but as I was speaking to some folks while we were having lunch, it can end up being a bit of a garden, and you want to weed the garden, and you want to really focus on the things that are going to be the most productive, most fruitful. And so the key here is to find out what people are willing, what pain people have, and how the solutions that you're building are going to solve real problems that people have. And then, as you know, one of my hats has been to run a technical team. So in general, I've worked with a lot of XML documents. I've worked with a lot of structured data. Structure is good, curation good, documentation really critical. API sounds like congratulations on your API. That's going to enable a lot of playing around. I think it's also critical to have committed development partners. And really better to have one or two that are really in there with you than 15 that are like, yeah, that's cool, we should do something. Because you want to be conservative with your energy and with your attention. And then lastly, evangelists, having people that are, may not be from a fancy university or a fancy company, but are just into what you're doing, are your best friends. So taking good care of your evangelists will pay dividends in the long term. Thank you very much. So I guess we could open it up to the
I had a question right here. For the alt metrics, is that only tracking documents that have DOIs assigned to them? Is that what it's queuing on? Is the digital object identifiers?
Yes,
so again, yeah, really important to think about when thinking about the OSP, assigning those unique identifiers, assigning those digital object identifiers to either your data set so those data sets can be tracked, or to the results of whatever query you put against that data set, or the analytics, what you eventually analyze coming out of that. Again, having that systematic identifier will lead to people getting credit for the work that they've done, whether it's assigning the DOI to a piece of code that helped to query the data set, a particular snapshot of the data set at that point in time, or the results that came out of applying that algorithm, that code, to that data set at that point of time. You want to be able to get credit, you want to be able to get recognition, you want this to go towards your promotion and tenure, you want people to be able to look back and see what you've done. And you want to be able to look back and see what you've done, probably more importantly than anything else.
I have a problem. So, Caitlin, your referencing this kind of idea of pain points is a funny one. So what do you do with an industry that is unable to recognize its own pain points? And having suffered through several years of academic governance at the highest levels, I've now seen that the extent to which, and I'll be blunt, that it's organized like a circular firing squad, or to put it even more bluntly, a kind of fractal foam version, but it's infinitely recursive circular firing squad, in the sense that it's an it's a form of social organization that in many ways is deeply conservative, as it should be, right? I mean, it's, the goals here is to produce some kind of abiding form of knowledge. Not to blow in the wind, but at the same time, I think it's become immensely hidebound in many ways. And some of the things that we're dealing with in terms of different generations of scholars who are trying to sort of guide and steer these institutions through rough waters that even much younger people don't understand at all.
Yeah.
So it's certainly my view as one of the people here that we're working with people who don't really understand what the problem is.
I think that's an excellent question. My approach, and I will admit that I had an intern last summer from Stanford Business School who had a PhD in material physics, material science from Northwestern, and then he was at Stanford Business School. He's a real idiot. And I think I was his intern over the summer, more than he was my intern. I learned a tremendous amount from this guy. Bryce Maradig, for the record. Bryce taught me how to do exactly what you're talking about, how to discover pain points. So prior to working with Bryce, I would, if we had, for example, we were going to build at Digital Science a conference intelligence service to track invited talks, seminars, because we wanted to know who was given talks where, and we thought this would be a very valuable signal of academic esteem, especially for young faculty members who don't have the big publication record yet. And so we invited lots of people, we had a workshop, we talked, people were like, yeah, that sounds really cool, that would be interesting. And Bryce was like, I'm completely skeptical about this project. What you need to do is go find people that that you think are the clients of this product, and talk to them, and treat those interviews like a therapy session. I mean a therapy session, as in, lie back, tell me how horrible it is. Tell me, bitch to me. Tell me all of the awful things that you have to put up with. And if you don't hear them talking about the solution that you have, your product is not going to sell. So the goal is to go out in vivo to the people who you think will use or buy your product, and let them tell you how horrible it is. And I guarantee you that even though these faculty members and the administrators that you work with might be dysfunctional, which is definitely endemic to any organization, public-private.edu.org, people will tell you, people will be able to answer the question, what's the difference between what you want to do in your role and what you have to do? What do you wish you could do? And it's the gap between those two things that are the pain points that people would love for somebody else to solve. I hope that addressed your.
No, it's excellent, and it's an excellent response, and I agree. In principle, I agree with you. In practice, I think it's also important to be aware of the fact that in many cases the people who listen to this level also can be relatively kind of armor-plated and very strategic in terms of what they will and will not say. So it's not a light therapy session. This is dealing with some pretty hard cases. And people as well who are, as I think we've discussed in this, we've seen discussed from many different perspectives, also kind of have a sense that the wind is blowing in some complicated ways and may also be very suspicious. Right? And so it's a difficult set of negotiations, and I think that the sort of takeaway from what you're saying is that listening very carefully to those discussions and also documenting that process of listening and structuring those kinds of dialogues and figuring out what areas we do and do not have covered, where are the holes that are just going to rely on trust, and where are the ones where we can really make absolutely concrete arguments, pro or con, that people can really evaluate on a kind of a potentially quantitative basis. So, and actually, one more question maybe for you. It's my imagination that people, as they start to play with the OSP corpus, hopefully, and I know that Dennis has said that the status of search, some kind of live search, is problematic. That one of the things that we'll be able to see is the developmental process of people searching, and that process of people searching, which is the kind of metadata generated by that, will actually, in some ways, to the extent that we have a product, really be part of the product as the basis for a kind of community inquiry, community research. But can you imagine issuing a DOI for every single Google search that someone does? How do you scale that? Do you do a DOI for a sequence of them over an hour? Is each individual one? You need some pretty big numbers for this.
Yeah, and this is a good question, and it's a question that a lot of people, especially in the research data world, are asking this. So how do we capture that unique query against a database, which is essentially what we're talking about, right? Is a unique query against a database at a point in time. Is it appropriate to assign a DOI to that query? Is it not? Different disciplines are coming up with different answers for that, but I think it's a question that does need to be asked depending on how sensitive a particular discipline is to having that type of reference available, to having that type of replication or repeatability, to have the evidence in order to demonstrate that or to provide a foundation for that. So I simply encourage people to think about that as a possibility. How would that be managed? What type of platform, what type of infrastructure would be necessary? Is that something that this project cares about? Is it something, to Caitlin's point, that the users are going to be caring about?
I mean, one use case I can imagine is a lot of, like, at least I'm in public health, a lot of public health lit reviews say, okay, this is the date I did the query, these are the keywords I used.
Exactly.
And that would be, I guess, useful for anyone referring back to that lit review to see what, their search query returned.
Yeah. And if you want to talk to the person on this subject, her name is Victoria Stodden, and she's right here at Columbia University. She lives and breathes reproducibility.
Yep, absolutely.
Data reproducibility.
Take
She's
a look
phenomenal.
at
Victoria Stodden, S-T-O-D-D-O-N, I think.
S-T-O-D-D-E-N.
Yeah.
And her current project right now is Research Compendia. And she also worked previously on Run My Code, which again dealt with a lot of this. And if I'm correct in understanding that right now queries are being written against this database, are those being stored on GitHub or anything like that? Is that the plan for that? Yes? No? Who knows?
We're saving queries right now.
Okay.
We just released.
Right. Do you have an idea though? But I was going to say, I think, doesn't Figshare recently have an association with GitHub?
Josh probably could.
Well, I was gonna say a nice use case of speaking to sort of, I think, Ted's point. So an interesting analogy: the Sloan Digital Sky Survey, astronomical data set, which was among, I won't go too far out on a limb, but I'll say it was really one of the first major astronomical data sets with a built-in SQL interface. They logged queries from essentially day one through the gateway that they had set up, And a group out of Johns Hopkins, I'd have to go back and find sites, has been doing some really interesting research on essentially how the astronomy community learns SQL. You watch the sophistication of queries progress over time. It's a spectacularly interesting data set. So there are those kinds of examples as well. And as you think about different ways people would engage with and use these kinds of this kind of a resource, not only do you want to use those to help improve the product, essentially, there may well be research insights.
It becomes a data set in and of itself.
So, I have a question that I'm just sort of thinking through in the last couple of minutes. So I may have missed some important element that invalidates it. But let me just throw it out there. So we've been sort of thinking through the question of how we begin to extract citations, which the gold in this data set are the citations. And, they're represented in any number of different formats. They may be partial, and there are all sorts of problems with that, right? But the other direction to approach from is to start from a well-defined library and search for the elements in that library. And it sounds like that would be the hook into all metrics. It could also be the hook into CiteSeer, right? They could do and for us, probably the key determinant of what would be valuable to us is that the results of that are themselves building blocks for other kinds of analysis and searches. So that's information that I think would be static if somebody would come along and say, we'll run your data set against our 120 million articles. That's not going to capture everything, but it'll capture some significant number. But then we need that back in order to provide the building blocks for other kinds of analysis. If you want to do comparisons of the curricula across institutions, if you want to look at, what are the 10 best political science departments in terms of number of women authors taught? What are the 10 worst? Those kind of, you could spin out any number of interesting scenarios that need that citation data. So I'm both very seduced by this prospect, but also very concerned that data come back to us in some fashion so that we can make it part of the platform.
Yeah, no, I would love to connect you with Ewan and his team. They would treat the syllabi as a data source, like blogs or like any text, and they'll scan it and they'll find links and they'll find DOIs. I presume most researchers aren't going to put DOIs in their syllabi, right? So it's probably a lot of links to papers, and their scripts will resolve the links and then find the article and then find the DOI on the article and then connect the DOI with the document. Again, another reason why you would need unique identifiers for those. It would be valuable to have unique identifiers for those syllabi because it would just make your table a lot easier.
Yeah. The syllabi, sure, we can. No, that's not already there. It's,
it's a very straightforward process.